today, where you can see the content as well as me at the same time. And I thought that would be a good idea so that I could talk you through this passage that you've had a look at for homework over the past week, although everything's technically homework now, isn't it? And give you some hints and tips as to how you could have accessed the higher marks on this particular piece of work. Now, the very best answers that I read did two things. First of all, they showed me that they really had an awareness of this moment in the epic and why Homer had chosen to use certain words at this particular time. The other one that really impressed me was that they isolated particular words in the passage. They didn't talk about whole sentences in a generic manner. Oh, the audience will be able to relate to that, or they can just imagine that scene better. Instead, again, they thought about why has Homer chosen that particular word to describe that item or that person, and what effect does it have? So I'm going to give you some examples of how this could have been done, working through the passage itself, and I'll try and use line references so that you know where to look as I'm describing that to you. So starting with knowing the context of the particular scene and trying to attach your analysis back to that. We have a look at those opening lines. A lot of you quite rightly picked up on Penelope's emotions and the hyperbole that she had wept to her heart's content. But the very best answers thought about the context and the fact that it's ironic that the man she's crying for is actually sat there right in front of her at this very moment. The same could be said about the description of Odysseus's clothes. So many of you picked out the fact that these are particularly grand clothes. He's describing a thick double purple cloth. Purple being a particularly rare colour and usually reserved for royalty. But again, the very best answers thought about how interesting it was that this description of Odysseus and what he was wearing comes at a time that we need to be reminded that that is what he's like, because he's sat there disguised as an old man and as a beggar. The brooch too. Homer could have chosen to have any particular scene that he wanted on that brooch, but he chose something very unique. And it's because he wants to foreshadow a moment that's coming up in the story. And some of you identified the fact that the hound and the fawn is an analogy for Odysseus, who is going to soon come up against the suitors in book 22 of the Odyssey. And therefore, when you are picking out those violent verbs, it would have been good to try and connect it to the rest of the story, to the rest of the epic. And I even saw some really nice ideas about the idea of comparing the suitors to a fawn also makes us question whether Odysseus' punishment of them is going to be right and just and perhaps a little bit excessive. Now, the other thing that I said I wanted to see more of was isolating individual words. And I've also already given you some examples of that. For example, purple. Picking out why a purple cloak? Well, that says something about his social status and his royalty. But when we get to talking about the simile, this is where it should have really come into play. So you'll see in the final two lines, it gleamed on his body like the skin of a dried onion. It was so smooth and it shone like the sun. I tell you, all the women were fascinated by it. Now, with a simile, we're of course going to pick out the words that follow like. So what is the direct comparison that Homer is using? We've got the skin of a dried onion, and then we've also got the sun, capital S. That's going to be important, and some of you did pick up on that. So the skin of a dried onion, it's not enough to say an onion is just a relatable item for people in the ancient world, because Homer could have chosen any relatable item at this moment, but he didn't. He chose the skin of a dried onion. So we have to stop and think, well, what is that like? Well, onion skin is delicate and fine and transparent. And what that shows is that Odysseus' cloak is fine and delicate. It's been woven with great skill. And who's made that clothing? Of course, it's Penelope. So what he's actually doing when he describes it, like the skin of a dried onion, is he's flattering her. And some of you picked that out, and I thought that was just beautiful to know why at that moment he described his clothes in that way. Similarly, with it shone like the sun. capital S. In the ancient world, the sun is a god. It is a divine being. And that's really the connotation that I wanted you to take out of that. And again, to think of that contrast between Odysseus that is sat in front of Penelope and his current appearance, and godlike Odysseus, which is his usual epithet. So I hope you found that useful. When we do look at another Odyssey 10 marker together, that's what I'm going to be really looking for. You're already doing a great job at using a range of the passage and picking out the actual techniques Homer uses, but two words, context and isolation of keywords.